But you know what? You've only known me like 30 years. So you don't know what I was like before. Um,
What, when you were seven?
yeah, I was less fired up at 7.
Yeah.
Not a lot less, but less.
Yeah.
Welcome to the New York Sports Nation podcast from the Pix 11 Sports Department, high above 42nd Street in the heart of New York City. I'm indeed your host, Todd Ehrlich, the executive producer of the Pix 11 Sports Department. Let's welcome in the Ranger Insider, the host of the pre and post game. Sometimes he's between the glass, ducking pucks. Sometimes he's writing for the website. He does it all. The great John Giannone. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. Thanks for that intro, Todd. And sometimes I duck pucks, and 9 years ago I failed to once, and that provided a nice little scar for life. So that's good.
And the video's on YouTube. For those of you at home, after you listen to the podcast, check it out. It's a dangerous job, this candy store we all live in, John.
It's amazing, actually. I've been in the candy store for more than 30 years, and it is now and will ever be the greatest gig that I've had, because to watch these guys with this skill and this passion from that close is something, again, as somebody who went to the Garden for the first time as a 9-year-old back in 19 blah, 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 it's crazy crazy to think that I could do that for a living. So yeah, it's a candy store. It is very sweet.
I was in my mid-20s in 19 when you went to your first game. I remember it well. You were a cute kid, John.
Yeah, well, thank you. I like to think that. Yeah.
Joining us also from the Pix 11 Sports Department, my favorite sportscasting animal, the Moose.
What's going on, guys? How are you?
Oh, Moose, when we hear your voice, we're so good. We're so good. Moose, thanks for
How
coming.
you doing, Mark? It's good to hear from you, bud.
Yeah, Johnny. Hey, listen, you do a great job. I love watching you and Hank and Steven on the post game. You guys do a call like it is and do a great job for the Ranger fans. You do tremendous work on MSG.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's really fun too, to be honest with you. You know, to have not only the voice of two goalies, but two guys who got along so well during their time together. And you know, I could tell really from the first day that Hank was in our studio that it was going to work. I mean, I interviewed him about 1,500 times in his 15 years. So I figured that there would be enough comfort between the two of us, but I wasn't really aware of how well Steve and Henrik get along. And the fact that it comes across that way is pretty satisfying to all of us. We have a really good time in the green room. We have a good time when right before the light comes on, and we really enjoy it once it does as well.
And you always knew he was going to dress the part. There was never a concern there.
I got to say, I tried to up my game in that department. And then the second time he came in with about an $8,000 wool suit, I was like, all right, it's useless to even try. I mean, I'm going to throw up my hands, throw in the towel, do what I do, and realize that, you know, when they take a shot of the three of us on set, I know I'm a distant third, but at least I'm a bronze medalist. So that's better than nothing.
You're on the podium.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not surprised in that regard, Todd, only because that's how he was as a player. And I remember, realizing that you'd go to the captain first after a game in the dressing room, and then you'd go to a couple of the guys who were influential in the game, good or bad, and then you always had to go to Henrik. I could remember some nights making that walk over to his locker and almost dreading how it was going to go. Although I will say he was the 10 most respectful athletes I've ever been around, and I've been around thousands of them. So for me, he always made my life better. And I never failed in 15 years to walk up to him on the last day, on baggy day at training center, and thank him for making my life easier, because he always understood what my job was. And he always gave me both patience and honesty, and that's all I could ask for. So in answer to your question, I'm not surprised we get honesty from him now. What will always amaze me, and I even talked to him last night about this, is that English is not his first language. He still speaks fluent Swedish. He still can speak German. And for him to be able to articulate like he does on the air, on a set with a red light on and all those lights blaring at him is fairly amazing to consider how well he does it at this early a stage in his TV life.
I got to tell you, I agree 100%. In TV, we covered some big regular season games and then all of the playoff games. And my first stop was kneeling in front of Hank's locker, because if you're not there first, you're not there. And I was always holding your mic or someone else's mic, but he was always the spot to get to because he was always honest then and articulate. You're right.
And that's what goalies do too, Todd, right? Like goalies, remember, they're so locked in on, obviously their one and only job is to stop the puck, but that's why they make such good analysts, just like catchers in baseball, because they see everything. So when the puck's not coming at them and they see it the other way, they have an ability to analyze what's happening on the ice. And that's why we've really been blessed and so beneficial to have not only Hank, who's seen everything, but Steve, who has taken on such an analytical role now. He has really warmed to the statistical element of the game and how it can impact from game to game. And I have been amazed in the 3 years I've done this element of the job, the hosting with Steve, that how many times in the pregame he will single out through analytics an element of the game that absolutely becomes the storyline over the next three periods. It's remarkable to watch, and it's such a benefit for us to have.
Well, it's from all the tape he watches to be prepared for your commute into the office, which obviously is captured by Cadillac.
That is great.
Yes,
Sponsors
it
love it.
is.
He's a sponsor's dream, John.
We love sponsors, John.
Those were some sweet cars they lent us for the day.
They were some. Oh, I thought that was your ride. You didn't get that for doing it? Joe's like, I'll talk to you, Todd, on the way into the office if I get a Cadillac. Speaking of Joe and people that English is their second language, but he is very articulate and charming. He's no average Joe. You've heard from him already on the podcast. Joe Masseri. Thank you.
Awesome to be talking after a big Rangers win last night.
Huge. So let's start with the fact, John, that the Rangers are indeed like Frankenstein alive.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
They're coming off suffering 2 losses in Pittsburgh, where Igor was pulled in both games, and they were facing elimination last night. The Rangers stood tall. They went down 2-0, but they still forced a Game 5 coming up Friday night. There was a different, some might say more encouraging, Igor chant that started prior to the national anthem. John, would you say that Igor last night returned to his Vezina, hopefully, trophy-winning form? He is the favorite. After shutting the door on an early 5-on-3, he finished with 29 saves after giving up 10 goals in just 45 shots, and again, getting pulled twice in Game 3 and 4. Did he return to form last night, John?
He definitely did, and on a stage that he had never been on before, one where everybody was counting on him to return to that form you talked about. I'll be a little bit more definitive, Todd. He's definitely winning the Vezina, and you know how you know that? Because today he was nominated for the Hart Trophy for League MVP, and it's not every day that a goaltender is honored in that regard. So if he's probably not going to win the Hart. I think that's going to go to Austin Matthews. But just to be nominated and the only goalie nominated, well, then by deductive reasoning, he's got to win the award for best goaltender, and he will. And I think it'll be a runaway win, because I think what you saw in games 2 and 3 is in games 3 and 4, A, when he's not on his game, and B, when the Ranger defensive structure is not on its game, then you see what kind of a team the Rangers could sport. Now, that's a 108-point team in the regular season. They got there on the strength of strong defensive structure in the last 3 months and the best goalie in the league. So to see what he did last night, to me, was super impressive, understanding the stage. And I think it was the national anthem chants of his name in more rapid succession than in the sing-song Igor that he heard for 2 games in Pittsburgh, which, again, he's never heard before. keep in mind, everything he's experiencing, he's going through in the NHL in North America for the first time. So understandable and explainable why maybe there would be some bumps along the way. But as Henrik Lundquivst said last night, I didn't learn anything new about him that I didn't already know in terms of his fortitude and his ability to command that stage. So now what happens when he goes back into his personal house of horrors for Game 6?
John, playing off, you mentioned about the defensive structure being a lot better. Obviously, 55 was back on the ice last night in Ryan Lindgren, who's unbelievably tough, and you know that better than anybody else. Fox looked a lot more comfortable on the ice. He obviously was on the penalty kill early. I mean, there's a lot to like about Lindgren. How important is he come Friday night to be able to suit up and play for Coach Gallant?
Mark, I think you hit the nail on the head, because not only what he does in the defensive zone, that level of importance alone speaks volumes. The ice time he gets every single game, the fact that all of his metrics tell you how good a defensive defenseman he is. But the point you make about what he does for Adam Fox can't be overlooked. Again, Adam Fox was asked to step in with a new defense partner in games 2, 3, and 4. And there just was something inherently different and not as structured or good about what Adam Fox can do on the ice as there is with his comfort level with Ryan Lindgren. These guys go back to when they were 12 and 13 playing for the U.S. developmental team together. They played in world championships together. They played in world juniors together. They won a gold medal together. They have been together for so long, they are hand in glove. And when you take Ryan Lindgren out of that equation, not only do you lose the skill set he brings, but you lose the comfort level for the Rangers' best offensive defenseman. And to me, that was as important a reason for 14 goals against in 2 games as anything else.
John, what about the emotional lift that Ryan gave the Blueshirts last night?
They definitely needed one. And I think what it probably did was, especially earlier in the game, you remember, like you said, Moose, he was part of that penalty kill, that 5-on-3 2-minute PK, 25 seconds into the game. He blocked 2 shots during that equation. And we had talked about on the pregame, they blocked 31 shots in game 1 alone when Lindgren played 35 minutes. They blocked 27 combined in games 2, 3, and 4. So again, there's just an element of inspiration that Ryan Lindgren brought right from his first shift of the game last night. Then to see him on the bench struggle as he did, actually left the bench for a short time and came back. For him to come back and then be on the ice at the very end of the game and put a shot from 160 feet into an empty net to ice the game has to be inspirational. It has to be emotional. And I think you guys are right. What he does in game 6 is going to go a long way toward what the Rangers feel they can be, both emotionally and physically.
John, you mentioned the chemistry, obviously, that he has with Fox. I want to look at the other side here for a second, because we saw what happened when Sidney Crosby went off the ice, and it looked like the Penguins were flustered. It looked like they were disorganized. They didn't know what to do with those lines for a couple minutes, and that's when the Rangers scored 3 goals in just under 3 minutes there. So can you talk about just what you saw during that time when Crosby first went out, and what you've seen as far as his impact on the series and what it could mean going forward if he can't play in Game 6?
Yeah, no question, Joe. That's going to be the biggest question going into Saturday night. Or is it Saturday night? No, it's Friday night.
Friday night.
Yeah, I lose track of days of the week. They all end in Y, and especially when you play every other day. I go, what the heck is this?
Well, that's what happens when you go to work one day and then don't actually leave till the next day, because it turns midnight. So
I almost
Which is when
Sunday,
we corralled you into doing this.
Correct. I think the biggest question in the rest of this series is the status of Sidney Crosby. Henrik Lundquivst was the first one to point it out, and he said it at the end of the second period. There was a direct correlation between Sidney Crosby leaving the ice by the Zamboni entrance, where his whole team saw him leave the ice, and then what the Rangers did subsequent to that. Mike Sullivan downplayed it after the game. He has to, because if Sidney Crosby can't play Game 6 and or Game 7, then how could you go out and say, yeah, my team's a different team when he doesn't play? That immediately puts the thought in their heads that they are a different team. The bottom line is they are. He's the heart and soul for 17 years now of a franchise. He has 3 Stanley Cups in his pockets. He has MVPs and a certain first ballot Hall of Fame on his resume. The guy is as important to his team as any athlete is perhaps in any sport other than Tom Brady.
Wow,
and it's not an overstatement. I mean, he's a remarkable leader. Every single syllable that comes out of his mouth, his team hangs on it. Everything he does, his team hangs on it. And then, oh, by the way, in the first 4 games of the series, at the age of 34, in his 16th straight playoff, he goes out and scores 9 points in 4 games and leads everybody but Cale Makar. It's crazy how good he is and how impactful he is. And I think his loss, not only for that part of his equation, but just what he does on the ice. You take him away, Jake Gensel is not going to be the same player. Brian Rust is not going to be the same player. Then if you have to put Evgeny Malkin in the top line center spot, the second line and the third line and the fourth line are all going to be not as impactful. So that's why I say on every conceivable level, Sidney Crosby's presence and status for games 6 and 7 is the most important element going forward.
And, I think you saw that, especially in game 1 when the Penguins went down, and then in game 3 when it was tied at 4 in the third period. He just knows when to assert himself. And the way he dominates the puck, gets all that attention, and then gets his teammates involved. I mean, it's just incredible how different of a team they look like last night once he went down.
He's remarkably smart. He's remarkably inspirational. And, again, Rangers fan a reason for not liking him, and it goes back 16 years. And, it's well chronicled. Heck, in the first period last night, we saw him, take a dive to the ice and try to draw a penalty when Mika Zibanejad hit the visor of his helmet. That's what Sidney Crosby does. That's what all great players do, because they they would get the benefit of every doubt because they've earned the benefit of every doubt given what they've accomplished in their careers. Now, all that said, it still does come down to, will the Penguins be able to overcome or survive without that level of player? I don't know that they can, either with the puck or on the bench. And I do think there was an extra emotional impact to watching him have to skate off and walk off the ice into the dressing room and never come back. I don't know how it wouldn't be that kind of an emotional impact. Will it carry over to the 2 days later? Will it carry over to 4 days later if it gets to a game 7? That's to be determined.
John, I wanted to ask you about the kids line, because, pound for pound through the first 5 games, they've been the best. They've been the best line that the Gallant has rolled out there with Hedel, Lafreniere, and Capo Caco. Are you surprised? The average age of the 3 is 21. Are you surprised at how consistently well those 3 have played together in this series?
In a word, yes, that's 2 words. I am very surprised. In fact, I thought the biggest question mark going into the series for the Rangers would be those 3 kids, having never played in a playoff game before, because quite honestly, the bubble didn't really count, having never understood the stage, and also having had very uneven seasons. I think Philip Hedel underachieved, and he'd be the first one to admit it. He struggled with injuries at times. Capo Caco only played half the games, and Alexis Lafreniere was benched a week and a half before the season ended because his coach felt he needed time in the press box watching a game from above and maybe hitting the reset button. So there was a huge element of question about what these kids would do. I do think, and Steve Valiquette made the point on the air last night, and I agree with him, the fact that they did have not only uneven seasons, but also, the fact that they were not in the lineup for full years, they may have fresher legs and fresher mindsets than some other players. The other element is, as Gerard Gallant said before the playoffs even started, sometimes ignorance is bliss. And it's not an insult to say that they're ignorant, but when it comes to the inherent pressures of being in the playoffs and everything that surrounds it, if you've never experienced it before, then you're ignorant to it. And maybe that's been a help to them as well. Now, the double-edged sword is, if they are your best line, your chances of winning, these next 2 games goes down. They still need Zibanejad to be better. They still need Chris Kreider to put a goal in the net now and then. They still need Artemi Panarin to be more impactful. I still do think if that's your best line, you're going to really have a hard time getting to the next round.
You know, John, you mentioned the bubble. Let's not forget, it was out of that and that draft lottery that the Rangers got the number 1 overall pick, which of course turned into Alexei. So that kind of worked out, even though I know Rangers fans were a little disappointed at the time.
Yeah, it definitely did. And listen, there are some who would say playing the intensity that was on the ice against the Carolina Hurricanes in that first round, even though there was no crowd noise. It wasn't in anybody's home building. It was in some random building to these players in Toronto. All of that made it a very unique and almost dystopian level of playoffs compared to what we've seen in the first week and a half. But that said, there was at least the understanding among some of the players that the intensity level does increase at that time of year. But yes, you're right. Since they were placed into the play-in round, that made them eligible for the draft. And then through sheer ping pong luck, they were able to get the number 1 pick. And I do think Alexis Lafreniere showed signs. When you consider that he inched closer to 20 goals in his second season, having never really played much power play time, not being on the penalty kill, his minutes are limited. The more he gets comfortable with those elements of the game and the more time he sees on ice, you're looking at a 25, maybe 30 goal guy, and that's not a bad number. He isn't going to be Austin Matthews as a number 1 overall pick. He isn't going to be Connor McDavid, but he should be a serviceable top 6 winger with a good long career in the NHL.
John, how much did coaching come into play last night? Gerard had them at practice running gassers. The Rangers blocked shots last night. They competed for pucks in front of both nets and on the boards. And post-game, Coach called the performance of the Rangers, quote, competitive as hell, unquote. How much credit do you give to him for their performance last night?
But, John, you know what I thought was really huge in that is 13 seconds after they take that 3-2 lead, Gensel comes back, they tie it at 3. And, I mean, it felt like a lot what happened in Game 3, and then Pittsburgh came out and dominated that third period. Again, Crosby was on the ice in that one, not in this case. But they showed some resiliency here because you just overcome that 2-goal lead. The crowd is in it. You finally, because it felt like a morgue in there before that, I felt like early in the second period. You give them something to erupt about, but they come out after that second intermission and they get that power play, and they showed that they were going to be resilient here. They weren't just going to fold. I mean, how much does that take out of a team to expend that emotion to come back and then have you punched in the gut 13 seconds later?
Yeah, that can really go both ways, right, Joe? Because I think what I found very interesting, and I've been in that building so many times over the last 20 years, is that could go either way in the fan base as well. You score 3, you take the lead, and then 13 seconds later, you spit it back. How is the crowd going to react when the team leaves the ice after that buzzer sounds? The crowd gave the team a standing ovation. And I think it was a little bit for what they had accomplished to go from 2-0 down to 3-2 up. And I think it was a little bit, let's go. Just because you guys just gave up the lead again doesn't mean we're quitting on you. Don't quit on yourselves. It was a real interesting statement, I thought, made by the fan base, because that could have been like, we've been in the Garden for so many years. There could have been some wonderment about, oh gosh, what are we getting into? And maybe a little bit of dread, but there wasn't any. There was a complete support as the Rangers left the ice. And then a little more than 2 minutes into the third, they score the goal that ends up standing up as the winner on a penalty that I thought was pretty sketchy, to be honest with you. I mean, offensive zone, puck wound around the boards. The guy on the Penguins decides to just let the puck run the boards back to his point man. And by doing so, he bumps into a Ranger and they call interference on that play. I wasn't sure about that penalty, but listen, Rangers fans would say they haven't been. There's no question he did. And that's what I mean by good players. Smart, witty players who understand the moment. He absolutely sold it because he threw himself backwards away from Pettersson. Mike Sullivan, if you're a lip reader, and I think that's a good benefit to have if you're between the benches, you know exactly what he thought of the call. But again, Rangers fans would tell you that the Rangers have been gypped out of 7 or 8 calls in this series. So, que sera, sera. I never like to single out officials either way, because they're all moments in time, largely in a game of 60 minutes and 1,000 different things happening. So, I thought by and large, the fact that the Rangers capitalized on it with their second unit power play and a kid who had never scored a goal in the playoffs before was also an instrumental and an inspirational part of holding down that lead in the last 18 minutes.
John, a two-parter for you. Number one, Valley talks about it a lot, I mentioned it early on in the pregame last night before the game for Shesterkin to feel the puck early and gain a little bit of confidence. How important is that going to be tomorrow night, going back to the House of Horrors for a Game 6 in Pittsburgh, with or without Crosby for the Penguins, for Shesterkin to get off to a good start? The other one I want to ask you about was injuries. Mentioned about the return of Lindgren. We know Goudreau's week to week. He's not returning this series. Mott got back on the ice about 6 days ago, according to the head coach. Any shot you see Mott at any of these last 2 games of this series, if it should go to a Game 7 Sunday night?
I'll take the first one first, Moose. I think it's beyond vital because from the 6:30 warm-up straight through the national anthem all the way until the first time he does touch that puck, he is going to be targeted by Penguins fans because they know, or they think they know, that what they did in games 3 and 4 had an impact on what Igor Shesterkin did on the ice. So he's going to hear it, and it's going to be loud and constant. So I do think silencing them early, either by making saves or having the Rangers score early, is going to be so important, because human nature alone tends to take over if bad things have happened to you and bad things continue to happen to you. And, again, the great benefit of having Henrik on our show is that, as Steve Valiquette said, with the way his career went in 15 years, he literally has experienced everything. So we could even talk to him about the amount of times he had House of Horror nights in Montreal, and then in the Eastern Conference Finals, they have to play Montreal.
John, let me jump in. Let me jump in there just 1 second, because you mentioned that getting him early. Even in the game last night, when they scored the Penguins in the first period, that goal that they scored, throwing it back from behind the net, off his skating in, he was bent over, and he was like, it was almost like I looked at him and I said, he's thinking, not again. Like, are you kidding me? But I give credit to the defense, the way they stepped up in front of him. I mean, you mentioned it already, obviously, the blocking shots and Lindgren. But, I mean, I think he's going to need that also in Game 6, with that defense hitting the ice and keeping the shots away from him a little bit, too.
Oh, there's no doubt, Joe. I mean, this series is not going to rise to a 7th game victory for the Rangers entirely on the back of Igor Shesterkin. I think those days are over. Again, Henrik is a first ballot Hall of Famer and absolutely should be, but he also played, believe it or not, because he only retired 3 years ago, in a different era compared to what we're seeing now. Yeah. Offense is so much more prevalent. When you look at the scores of some of these playoff games, virtually every game in the playoffs first round, the winning team has 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 goals, right? And so you can almost, in this postseason, attempt to outscore your mistakes. Now, the Rangers couldn't do it in Pittsburgh, but I think they were shell-shocked, to be honest with you. As Henrik said, I thought the word was perfect. He said they looked paralyzed in Pittsburgh. So they're going to have to figure out a way around that paralyzation. But I do think that, they used the key to unlock something last night, and that is rediscovering what made them successful in the last 2.5, 3 months of the season, which is a defensive structure of all 5 players. And I guess maybe it just took the desperation of being, staring at elimination, being down 3-1. They know they have that again tomorrow, and they know they'll have that again if it comes to that on Sunday. So maybe that's a little bit more of a benefit for them in their own end than what they saw in games 3 and 4.
So, John, if you're a Ranger fan, which all of our listeners are, and you're looking forward to Friday night, the game starts, what's a key to look for that will tell the fans, you know what, we could be on the right track, could bring it back to MSG for Game 7, and what is your prediction for Game 6 in Pittsburgh?
Todd, I think the first thing I'd say is, you can predict what's important early, but then look at last night's game. For 30,
good point,
34
John.
minutes, there was nothing. The building was stagnant. The team was stagnant.
It was like a library or a church.
Yeah, they were
I dropped a pin. Joe heard it.
They were down 2 goals, but boy, if you walked into the building, you'd have thought they were down 5. Yeah. So it's so hard to know in these playoffs at this time of year what is going to be the determiner to turn things around. How many times have we seen game to game, even period to period in these playoffs from this series and almost every other? One team thinking, even last night, Washington Capitals are up 3-0 late in the second period in Florida. That's well on the way to victory.
Stop.
They end up giving up.
Stop. You're hurting me. Painful.
Right. Your past has that link, doesn't it?
Yes.
But it's happened so often. So it's hard to know. I could sit here and say, if the Rangers come out on their toes, as Henrik likes to say, and bringing the play to Pittsburgh, and if they score an early goal against Domingue, then obviously he's going to start thinking, okay, maybe I really am a third string goalie who's won 3 NHL games in the last 2.5 years before this playoff series. But who knows? Because listen, things were going perfectly well in the first period of game 3, and then Pittsburgh scored 5 in the second period. So there really is no way to know. I do think biggest, as I said before, determining factor is what is Sidney Crosby's status. If he plays, then I think it's a toss-up. Do I think they get to game 7? I think they absolutely have a puncher's chance to do that. And I actually would make them the favorites if Sidney Crosby doesn't play.
Does the puncher's chance have anything to do with Jacob Trouba's accidentally catching Crosby with an elbow? Is that the puncher's chance you're talking about?
Listen, what I will say about Jacob Trouba is this, and again, I watched him up close and personal for his first 2 years as a Ranger. I've watched him play every single game. The guy finishes checks as well as any defenseman in the league. He is a throwback in the regard of he looks for a hit. He takes advantage of a hit against a player who maybe doesn't think he's going there. And I think in last night's game, the follow through, the completion of the hit, which is he had his momentum going forward. In finishing his hit, his arm came up and he did catch Sidney Crosby in the face. Now, do I think that's intentional? I think the intent there is to hit Sidney Crosby. I don't think the intention is to knock Sidney Crosby out of the game. He has had 4 or 5 hits this year, 3 of which he had to answer to immediately by dropping the gloves and fighting. That would make you think he's a headhunter. I don't think Jacob Trouba is a headhunter. I think he hunts very hard open ice checks to send a message not only to the player he hits, but the team as well, and to take that player off the puck. Not every one of his splatter hits this year resulted in a head injury. Not every one of his splatter hits this year even resulted in head contact. The principal point of contact on that hit was not the head. The head was hit, but it wasn't the principal point of contact, which is the determiner for a penalty. Remember, there wasn't even a 2-minute minor called on that play. So to me, it looked like a good open ice hit that resulted in a follow-through contact with the head. I do not want to see Sidney Crosby out of the lineup, but that's me speaking as a hockey purist. and not as a Rangers fan. I want the best players to be playing and have the competition be on as level a playing field as possible.
I'd rather the Rangers win. I want the Rangers to win, John. Have it noted.
But if Sidney Crosby's out of the lineup, it's going to help the Rangers, period. Yeah. There's no other.
I'm good with that.
John, I want to circle back. Number one, anything on Mott? Number two is, you hear any word on how Lindgren came out of the game last night? Because you mentioned it. There was a time he went back to the locker room. He's going to be obviously of key importance, his availability tomorrow night.
Yeah, so I would say with Tyler Mott, he has been on the ice skating. I don't know that they thought, Moose, at the beginning of these playoffs whether he would be a first-round guy. I think Gerard Gallant expressed that he hoped he would be. I know with Gallant and with most coaches in the NHL, they want to see the player get into a practice, a full speed practice where he skates with his line mates before they do anything. But what I can tell you about the importance of Tyler Mott is, look what the lineup was in Game 5 last night. He skated 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. Now, part of that had to do with, if Ryan Lindgren tries 2 or 3 shifts and he can't go anymore, we don't want to go down to 5D, so we're going to dress 7. I suspect, given what Ryan Lindgren's condition is, and remember, he was on the ice for the last seconds of the game last night and took the curtain call as the third star of the game. So you'd like to think on that level alone, he probably emerged okay from last night and will be okay for Game 6. But I still wouldn't be surprised if we do see 11 forwards and 7D, just to be certain and safe. If Ryan Lindgren does have something happen during Game 6, they'll still have a full complement of defensemen. So maybe that has some impact on whether we see Tyler Mott, because I don't think you'll see Mott if they go 11-7. But if they go 12-6 and Mott is determined to be okay and Lindgren is determined to be okay enough, then maybe Mott would come back in.
John Giannone, you are awesome, sir. Thank you so much for living this with us here. Listen, what do you say Sunday night, if we're at the Garden, happen to meet up, let's talk for New York Sports Nation. We'll pull you aside for a minute and do this again.
Guy, yeah, I mean, I'm here, you're there, why not?
I love it. We'll bump into you in the alleyway again and set it up.
Hey guys, really, thank you. That's great. Anytime we get to talk hockey like this, it's awesome. So I appreciate you having me on, and good luck. And yeah, I hope we will see you guys down the road, literally and figuratively.
Thanks, John.
I'm a fan of literally.
Okay.
Sunday night would work great, John.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
I got to tell
really
you, the best Ranger guest we've had to date. Thank you so much. This was an interesting and exhilarating conversation, and for all our Ranger fans out there, a treat to hear you for this long. I'd like to thank you so much again, John.
Well, since I was your first Ranger guest, of course it would be, only follow that I was your best. But
Moose, why'd you tell him? Moose, are you texting him?
John, it's a fair point. It's a fair point, but I put you up against that.
You weren't supposed to tell him, Moose. You're like Abe Lincoln.
I know.
Like George Washington with the cherry tree moves.
I'm not a liar. I can't lie.
That's my job. It's not lying, It's schmoozing.
Keep up the great work, buddy.
Yeah, keep up the great work. We love watching you. And to all our fans out there, thank you so much for listening to New York Sports Nation, the podcast. We'll see you Sunday night on TV, 11 o'clock on Channel 11. Thank you.
Good to hear your voice. Thanks for hopping on today.
Anytime, man. No problem.
Anytime?
Oh, careful, careful, John.
We'll get to that, John.
To Joe and Moose, definitely anytime.